Hi, this is Scott with 4D Tech. Today we are in an 18 and newer body style Ford Explorer that came equipped with a 4-inch screen. Check out the description below for other model years that this video will cover as well. We will be performing the 4-inch to 8-inch conversion from 4D Tech that comes custom programmed as a complete plug-and-play kit for your vehicle. Everything that you see installed in this video comes in the complete plug-and-play kit. Before we get started, we'll need a few basic tools. 7mm nut driver, some plastic dash removal tools, and a T10 Torx driver. Let's get started. First, we need to remove these two pieces of trim on each side of the radio bezel. To do that, we start out at the bottom here. The piece of trim wraps down inside this compartment. So we start in between the bezel and the trim from the inside and outside, and pry with our dash removal tools and pull with our fingers to release the clips. There's a push pin in the center here that holds a little bit more securely than the rest of the clips, so you're going to want to work your way to the center. So you'll want to then move up here and release the clips from the top. If these panels have never been removed before, and especially if you're in a colder climate, this push pin will hold pretty well. So that's why you want to remove the top clip first and then work the center so that you don't release it and break the top edge of this panel. So once you release that, you'll want to grab a hold of here, and if the push pin is holding tight, you'll just want to rock it back and forth and pull it out. And this is the push pin that we're talking about here. And then we'll want to do the same thing on this side. Once you have those two side trims removed, you need to remove the 4 7mm screws found on each side of the radio bezel. Okay, with 4 7mm screws removed, we'll want to grab a hold of this bezel. You can grab behind these clips or so and pull forward to release it. We'll turn the bezel, and there's a single gray connector here with a push pin where my finger is there. There's a little release tab. You push down on it to unplug the connector. And then we'll want to set aside this radio bezel. When we put the new bezel on, we'll need the vents out of that one. So the next thing we'll need to do is remove this screen with the 4 7mm screws. You can also take out these 2 7mm at the same time, as this carriage with the module on the back will be coming out as well. When you are all done with the installation, you will end up with 2 extra screws, because it'll be the 2 screws where this bracket attached to the carriage, since we're removing both. So just keep that in mind when you're all done. So we'll pull out the screen on the bracket first, and there's a connector here, and it's a lever lock connector. So we push this little tab right there where my thumbnail is, and then push the lever 90 degrees, and it'll release that connector. The cable for that screen will be attached with a push pin right here to the carriage. So you'll want to pry that push pin out to be able to release the cable. Once the push pin is released, we have these two cables here to be disconnected. This one has a clip on the back where my finger is that you'll push in and release it. It's this little clip right on the top back to release that. And then this is another lever lock connector here. So you'll push the little lock right there with the pointer finger to release the gray lever and flip the gray lever 90 degrees to unplug it. This and the 4-inch screen get set aside as they are no longer used. Next, we'll take out the 4 screws holding in the audio control module here. This will need to come out since we need to plug in a harness behind it and run some cables below to replace the USB hub, and we'll be replacing a module underneath this as well. When we pull out the audio control module, we'll need to disconnect the connectors off the back. These antenna connectors, you push the little tab on the top back and unplug them. And then these two large connectors here, there's a tab right on top. You push that in and they disconnect as well. We'll just set this aside as it'll be going back in when we're done. Inside this compartment down here, which is kind of hard to see with the camera angle, there's a plate with the USB jack. We're going to reach behind that USB plate and push it out. And once that is out, there's tabs on the top and bottom of the USB plug that you separate, and the USB plug comes unplugged from the plate. And I'll show you here where it's a better angle. So there's a tab here and a tab here, and you're reaching around and separating those with your finger and pulling forward, and it'll release from the cable that's underneath there. That cable will get tucked in the dash as it's no longer being used, and this plate can get set aside. Now it is time to start routing some of the wiring. We have the main 4-inch to 8-inch conversion harness that comes in the kit. So this large connector here, we are going to grab the large connector that was plugged into the black module that we took out behind the screen and push that in. Make sure the lever lock is flat at the time that you start to push it in. You'll see the lever start to move. Then use the lever to draw it the rest of the way in until it's connected. Next, this T-harness with these two smaller connectors is going to get teed in at a module that's up here. It's basically directly above the speedometer. There is a flat connector up there with a nub. It's a little release tab on the left-hand side. It's got a little protect square around it, so you got to get your thumbnail on that, release the tab, and unplug it from the module. And this is the connector that we're talking about. So you'll plug that connector into one side of the T-harness, and then take the other side of the T-harness and plug it back into that module. This T-harness here that's got a couple pink wires in it, the one connector that was plugged in the audio control module will plug into that, and then the other end will plug into the audio control module when we reconnect that later. This connector here along with the USB cable that comes in the kit One end, it doesn't matter which end of the USB cable along with this connector, needs to get routed down behind this metal brace here, and then you'll pull it through the opening for the hub down in the compartment. We'll grab the supplied Android Auto Apple CarPlay compliant hub from the kit. Plug these connectors in. The clip will face on the outward side, and then the USB cable plugs in the connector diagonal from it. And then we'll take this with the USB symbols pointing up and slide it back in the hole where that plate was before. Next, we need to take this harness here. This is the harness that retains the backup camera if you have a backup camera. You take the connector that was in the back of the 4-inch screen, make sure the lever lock is flat, plug it into the connector till the lever lock starts to move, till it locks in, and then you'll take this yellow connector and plug it into the RCA connector on the main harness, and that jumps the backup camera over to the new system. Next, we'll need to install the GPS antenna for the Sync 3 system. The GPS antenna is required to be installed whether or not you are installing the navigation version. It's also needed in the non-nav to set the clock and to do 911 assist as well as the compass. We include these alcohol wipes to clean the surface first before you use the double-sided pad. So you take the alcohol wipe. Now you can mount this antenna a variety of places. I'm going to mount it to the bottom side of the dash pad here underneath the dash. It can go anywhere where there's no metal between it and the sky. So I'm going to mount it there. So I'm going to put the adhesive on the top of the antenna. Doesn't matter how you face the antenna, but the GPS symbol, the black top, must face up. You can't mount it upside down. You could also take this and adhere it downward to that module that we unplugged the connector from up here earlier. That's an option as well. So I clean the top of the antenna, and I'm going to reach up through this opening and clean the underside of this dash pad. And you'll just want to wait just a couple moments for the alcohol to evaporate before you adhere it, or else it will not stick. So you'll put one side of the sticky side pad on whatever surface you're going to adhere it. In this case, I'm doing it to the bottom of the dash pad, so I'm going to put it on the top of the antenna. Then peel the adhesive off the other side, and we'll reach up to the opening and you see I'm pushing it up firmly right underneath the plastic of the dash pad here. That will give plenty of signal for the Sync 3 through the windshield. Okay, now we'll begin reassembly of the vehicle now that we have all the harnessing installed. Next, we will reinstall the audio control module. This original USB cable that was plugged into the black box behind the screen gets tucked aside, as we will not be reusing that. So we'll plug in the original connector here, And we already installed the T-harness to one side, so the other side just needs to get plugged into the audio control module. And then the antennas need to get reconnected as well. The clips just face up and they match up color for color. You'll want to make sure as you're plugging in connectors that they're all firmly seated with the clips locking in. When you're tucking things back in, make sure that the square connector for the front bezel is coming through this notch in the dash still. You have to make sure you lift up all the cables for the conversion above the audio control module as you're sliding it in. And you're tucking the other cables behind it. There's a black nub in the back here that slips into a bracket right here. And once you're all aligned, the screw holes will line up. If it is not easily setting on those screw holes and you have to force it, then something's stuck behind the audio control module and you don't want to crank it down on the screws because you may pinch some wiring. So let's replace the 4 screws we took out earlier. And that's what I meant with the gray connector. You want to make sure it stays out of that opening. Even while I was installing this, it fell back in a little bit and we just had to retrieve it and pull it back out. Now we'll grab the new Sync 3 8-inch screen that comes from 4D Tech. The Sync 3 module will come pre-installed on the back of it with the screen, and the brackets will be pre-installed as well. So this is exactly how you'll receive it in the kit. And there's 3 connections that need to be made. This main connector, make sure the lever is all the way open. These harnesses sometimes ship with the lever closed, so you may have to push the little release, like on the other connector, and swing the lever down. Plug that in and use the lever to draw it in. Plug the new USB cable that we ran down to the new hub into the black port. The gray one does not do anything on the Sync 3. And then the antenna that we ran up there, you'll take this blue antenna connector. There's a little clip on it. That should be downward facing and plug in till it clicks. With those 3 things plugged in, we'll tuck the wiring behind and set the screen in the opening and put the 4 screws in. And next, I'll go grab the 8-inch bezel that's going to replace the 4-inch one that was here earlier. Okay, and we have the new 8-inch bezel here that comes with the kit from 4D Tech. And the 8-inch bezel only comes from Ford with automatic climate controls, which is the reason why we replaced that HVAC module inside of there while we were in there. So what you will gain with this bezel is you will gain single zone automatic climate controls, which means you'll now be able to set the temperature and treat it like it's an automatic climate controlled vehicle. The only thing you will not be able to do is split the zones between driver and passenger, because the vehicles that were originally manual climate controls do not have the sensors and damper doors to support dual zones. So you gain single zone climate control with this vehicle. Now you'll see the bezel does not come with the vents installed, so we'll need to grab those out of the old bezel. To get those out of the old bezel, we need to remove these 2 silver T10 Torx screws, and then they're just snapped in across the top. So we'll need to remove this screw and this screw. which I'm going to do off to the side on a soft surface. Once you remove those 2 screws, you'll see that the vents are loose, and you'll just need, there's clips that are slid, 4 clips across here that you have to put your thumb under to release them. And you'll just pull those clips up and work your way across. And then that comes off. And you'll see these are the clips I'm talking about here, 4 across, and they slide through these little holes here and over this triangle clip. So now we'll set aside the 4-inch bezel as it'll no longer be needed. When we slide these vents on the 8-inch bezel, you'll just want to make sure that you're sliding those tabs through those openings and then snapping it back on. And the 2 screws for the screw holes for the Torx will line right up at that point. They should just drop right in place. If those aren't lining right up, then there's something wrong with the way these tabs are clicked in above. So I'm just going to put those 2 screws back in over here. See, we have replaced the 2 screws underneath the vents there so that they're right back in. We'll push this door down so it's out of the way. We need to reconnect this gray connector here so it'll plug in with the clip facing upward if we got it on the side there, the clip facing the driver's side depending on how you have the panel tilted. Push it until it clips. Swing the panel around. The cable for that connector has to tuck into that little square that we pulled it out of. And then push the panel in place and the screw holes will line up there. Then we just need to replace the 4 screws we took out earlier. With those screws back in place, we'll just need to replace the trim panels that we took off at the beginning. So the triangle goes inside of here, so this panel will go on this side. Slide that in and just clip it in all the way down. And then same on this side. Okay, and just remember, once we're fully assembled, you'll still have 2 screws left over that held the metal bracket to the black carriage in which we took out earlier. Next, we need to run the can opener flash programmer that comes with the 4-inch to 8-inch conversion. The equipment in the conversion comes pre-programmed from 4D Tech before it ships to you. This programmer is used to then program the vehicle to accept the kit. In order to run the programmer, first we need to turn on the ignition. Next, we'll plug the other end of the pigtail into the diagnostic connector underneath the dash. Then we monitor the LEDs on the programmer. It will blink blue while it's programming the vehicle. You'll hear AM static as the audio control module resets a few times. This is completely normal with part of the programming. Once the LED turns green on the programmer, you can disconnect the programmer and pigtail and set it aside as it will no longer be needed. Now that we have completed the installation and run the programmer, we're going to fire up the new system. It may take a few moments to load the first time we fire up the system. Now that it's loaded up, you see that we have functioning Sync 3 touchscreen in this vehicle. We did install the navigation equipped unit in this Explorer, so this one does include nav as well. And you'll also see what we spoke about earlier. You gain automatic climate controls as well, but single zone. So you'll be able to set the temperature, control everything on the bezel and on the screen. Just if you push the dual function, it will not split between the driver and passenger. Now you see how to install the complete custom programmed plug and play 4-inch to 8-inch conversion for the 18 and newer Explorer from 4D Tech. I am Scott. Thank you for checking out our video.